know they find their trouble. I know they find their trouble. I know they find their trouble. I just they face my hustle. See when you start they go yimu, then they go start to they love you. Spiritual, highly spiritual. Spiritual, highly spiritual.
Peace, greetings, and welcome to Bolekaja, Diasporic Pan-African Discourse, a conversation series hosted by the Department of Pan-African Studies at Cal State LA. It features experts in Pan-African studies discussing diasporic Pan-African issues and experiences in keeping with the mission of the Department of Pan-African Studies as the intellectual arm of the revolution. The discussions in this conversation series pulsate with the ingenuity and agency of the diasporic African people and are instructive in both ongoing and impending struggles to envision and create an alternative diasporic African future, an authentic freedom and human dignity. Today's conversation will feature Dr. Nana Lawson Bush V, Chair of the Pan-African Studies Department at California State University, Los Angeles, and the former Director of the University of California, Irvine, and Cal State Los Angeles Joint Doctoral Program in Urban Educational Leadership. Rooted in Pan-Africanism, Nana Dr. Bush employs a Pentecostal revolutionary pedagogy, teaching from and to the spirit to foster a liberatory praxis. His approach to teaching is reflected in his research as he aims to contemporaneously disrupt power relations and to build programs, institutions, and states on the best of African philosophies and practices. In conversation with Dr. Bush will be Dr. Kadogo A. Kennedy. As the founder of the Kennedy Approach, a communications consultancy, Dr. Kennedy enjoys collaborating with organizations to create co-constructed learning opportunities in which clients can grapple to understand more about the dynamics of inclusive communication. The Kennedy Approach, Education and Communications Consulting LLC, was established in 2013 by Kadogo A. Kennedy, cultural and critical race theorist, instructional curricular and programming design expert, a seasoned educational consultant, and a public orator. Dr. Kennedy has trained instructional professionals employed by organizations of various compositions, from public and charter K-12 institutions, community colleges, and small nonprofits. The discussion will be moderated by Dr. James Thomas, Professor of Pan-African Studies at California State University, Los Angeles, where he teaches racial inequality, the Constitution and government, activism and emotion, critical race theory, and African American religion. He's an executive board member of the California Faculty Association. In addition, he co-founded Clergy for Black Lives and serves as a president of the San Fernando Valley NAACP. As Chief Operating Officer for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, he directed several programs to assist in the educational, financial, and emotional development of stakeholders living in low-income communities of color.
They are most certainly brilliant in their own right. As much as they are brilliant, they are loving. I love my people, and I'm so glad to be working with a group of colleagues that love our people too. And so I'm not going to take too long, but you are about to get a treat. You may never hear this again anyplace else, but you will hear it tonight. And we thank God for this opportunity. And so for all of those who are here, please know that Pan-African Studies at Cal State LA is a jewel, and it's not to be forgotten. We really do take seriously the fact that we are the intellectual arm of the revolution, and we certainly expect and believe that you will help to be the legs and the feet of the revolution. And so without any further ado, let's jump right in here. So I want to let you all open up, if that's okay, and then we'll get to some questions toward the end. So however you want to present. We're going to say ladies first, Dr. Bush.
Wow, I'm not surprised. Today I was talking to my class about the centrality of women from an African worldview, that life and the community is unfurled around the woman. So I'm so happy, of course, to be in this department where the theoretical view, which allows me to go first, is the one which dominates. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to come to you all today and speak to you a bit about African spirituality. In particular, I want to have a discussion with my good brother, Dr. Lawson Bush, about African spirituality and the ways it unfolds in the diaspora. But I'd like to begin with just giving us all a little bit of grounding as it relates to what ancestral worship or veneration, which me and Dr. Bush have entered into a conversation of maybe renaming, right, for the new world that includes the word celebration, ancestral celebration. In African, West African theoretical perspective, and that's one thing I want us to attach ourselves to early in this conversation, is that we're talking about a point of view or world perspective that comes from continental Africa. And this perspective has spread out around the world, across the waters, but we want to really know what that perspective is before we can really enter into conversation. So briefly, this is it. West African cosmology says that there are 3 tiers of celebration, right? The top, most illustrious tier is reserved for the supreme omnipotent God. From our perspective, we do not even approach that realm. It is too holy, too sacred, too beautiful to even be approached by us. Following that tier, we have a second tier in which we believe, and the other thing I want you to know is that there are no hard lines. If you imagine this world, this cosmology that I'm describing, you are going to see gradients, that you will not just see red, you will see scarlet, you will see merlot, you will see crimson, you will see brick. You will see all variations and gradients, okay? And so our cosmology is like that. The second realm, which is the realm of all supernatural beings, from our perspective, all supernatural beings, including spirits of nature, including ancestors, including Buddha and Jesus, the apostles, all of these, Moses, all of them live there in this second realm. However, there is also what I call an earthly realm. And in the earthly realm, supernatural beings and material beings, humans such as ourselves, they engage and they interact, right? This is where the exchange of prayer happens. In this supernatural realm where the ancestors live, we can have our collective ancestors or community ancestors in which we all celebrate people like Malcolm X, people like Ivan Van Sertima, people like Queen Nzinga, right? We also have individual ancestors, or those ancestors that follow our own family line. Now, from the African world view, we are matrilineal, and matrilineal does not cancel out patriarchy. One of the things it says, though, is we trace our line through the mother. Okay, so again, showing you the centrality of woman here. So that ancestral veneration is really going to be most powerful and most celebrated through the mother's line, right? We also want to know that there are a couple of categories, 2 categories of human beings or earthly beings. Those who are seen as anointed, touched, special, blessed in some way. Those people who are preachers, diviners, brujas, Wiccans, those people who deal with herbs and tarot and the forces of nature. And there are also human beings who are, I don't want to say just to diminish anybody, but they're just human beings. So in our cosmology, I want you to understand that it's very important for earthly beings, those that are divine in some way, and those that are normal earthly beings. It's very important for us to revere. It's very important for us to worship and or celebrate our ancestors, because as our libation noted for us, when we pay homage, when we celebrate our ancestors, we are ensuring our own success in meeting destiny. What do you think about that, Dr. Lawson Bush?
So my dear sister, you said a lot in the introduction. You've already gone deep. Just again, I'm excited to be with so many students, and definitely my colleague, Sister Dr. Kennedy and Reverend James. And of course, I'd like to just give thanks for those who put this event on. But I want to keep it moving in the interest of time. And just to say, yes, we started with the Black woman because the first images of God, period, was that of a Black woman. There was no other image of the divine other than the Black woman for thousands of years before any other image comes up about any type of deity. Whatever religion that you practice, whatever you see as your deity, the very fact that you even understand ancestors, this all comes out because of African people were the first to do this. So in essence, whatever religion that you're practicing, you are practicing an African religion. If you're a Christian, you're practicing an African religion. If you're worshiping in Buddha or Hinduism, you're practicing an African Islam, you're practicing an African religion. And hopefully we'll spend little time tonight trying to unpack and help you understand how and why that I say that you're practicing African religion, because all African religions, or all religions, are built on the principles and the foundation of African belief systems, explicitly and implicitly. So with that, Brother James, we'll go to you for our first question, then I'll build back into what Sister Kennedy has talked about.
Absolutely, very, very, very powerful. And I want to, now you mentioned ancestor veneration, and that you are now categorizing it as celebration.
Mm-hmm.
I would actually, and I like that, and I would actually, and so I'm going to. There are a couple of points that I think are important to mention just for those who may be on here who are Christian and who are saying, "What is this? What is?" You know, I tried to get my sister on. She's a "What is this?" Wow, she would be throwing oil. Dr. Bush, you can relate.
We'll take that oil.
Yeah. You can relate. But what I think is important, there's something that is called the Shema, and it's Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. And the reason this is important in any theological school that you go to, this is what they will talk about as the Shema. They also talk about this in the Jewish faith tradition. And so what is important, what they fail to tell you, is while they clearly embrace the Shema, while they clearly embrace the fact that the Lord our God is one, they neglect to tell you that the first time that's ever been said or ever been thought was when African people came up with it. And so for those who are maybe feeling some kind of way, some sense of uneasiness, I would just would quote Brother Chandler Williams in his book, The Destruction of Black Civilization. The Bible is probably the greatest evidence of the fact that all things spiritual originated in Africa. You know, and so I just wanted to throw that out for those who may be struggling hear this conversation. And I want you to hear it in the context of we are removing white supremacy from our thoughts. And much of what we believe about Christianity, those of us who represent the traditional church, much of what we have embraced and the ways in which we have demonized African spirituality is a direct result of white supremacy, which is what I would argue is called Western Christianity. And so with that said, can we have some discussion about what I think will trouble people the most? And that is this quote unquote ancestor worship, ancestor veneration. And I think you did talk about that. But I would like to just throw out as a caveat, the most expensive celebration that a Christian person will ever have is their funeral. And so, in my view, I think that is an attempt, maybe unconsciously, for us to get at the important spiritual meaning of what you all are speaking about when you talk about ancestral celebration.
Oh, wow. That is exciting. Let me first say, Alutua, continue. The struggle continues. If you feel uncomfortable or if you're struggling, that's where me and Dr. Bush want you to be, first of all. That's the place in which our consciousness begins to open and expand. So what we're really asking for you to do is suspend your judgment, right? This is the critical thinking intellectual process we ask you to engage. Suspend your judgment until the end of the conversation. That's the first thing. The second thing is, when we talk about worship and veneration, I'm not afraid of it, right? Because all it's saying to me is that we celebrate the souls, the life of those dearly departed people. When I walk into a cemetery to put flowers on my grandmother's grave, I see people having full-on picnics. When I grew up in, shotgun 60s, sorry, I had to take it back a little bit. Bros was always pouring a little something out, pouring a little liquid out and calling somebody's name, right? So what we should and must realize is that unconsciously, subconsciously, Jung tells us that there is such thing as a collective unconscious and inherited memory, that we do things called retentions. We might not know why we do them, but we're doing them for a reason. So that's one thing. And all over the world, you will see people venerating their ancestors, especially here in the United States. I was just at the Washington Mall not too long ago, saw a big statue of somebody named Lincoln next to water and fire, people leaving gifts and presents, saluting. In this capitalist country, if you shut down a bank, it must be important. President's Day, shut down. Shut down. So all around the world, even here, we see the importance of ancestral veneration, except for people of color, especially those of African descent. We are taught that this is a scary, spooky place to be. Are you scared, Dr. Bush, some ghosts? Do you think the ghosts don't come get you or something?
Not at all. Not at all, because I grew up Christian, and nowhere is ancestral celebration or veneration more prevalent than in the Bible itself. And we see that importance throughout the Bible. We see it in the life of Jesus, who himself was sacrificed. And then they poured libations to him and then ate his body as a form of veneration. To take on that bread is to say that you're taking on the body of Christ or the spirit of Christ. There's nothing more purely African than that, to eat a body and drink the blood, to take on the spirit of a hero, to take on those particular components. We see when Jesus goes to the mountain for transfiguration, he brings his ancestors show up. Elijah and Moses show up in the most important time of his life. His ancestors show up. So really, the Bible has no issue with ancestor veneration, worship, or celebration. When they begin the New Testament, they bring it talking about Jesus is the descendant of this, the son of who, the son of that. They call out a libation to let you know who Jesus is. The only way to understand who Jesus is to understand his history and his story, or to put like veneration or to honor those who have come before. And so that's how we know it's an African text. And that's how we know we're practicing African religion. Yes.
Dr. Bush, I just want to clarify that I think I'm hearing you say there are plenty of examples in the Christian Bible that uphold the practice, the ancient practice of remembering and celebrating the great deeds and works of those who have preceded us and transitioned on to the spiritual realm.
And I would just like to add one thing when Dr. Bush talks about communion. Well, the Catholics believe. If you are Catholic, you don't believe that communion is symbolic. You don't even believe that communion, that you receive the Spirit of Christ. You believe that when you eat that cracker and drink that wine, that is actually the body of Christ. And that is actually the blood of Christ. That's why you'll never see a Catholic pour out that wine when they're done. Now, the altar boy or altar girl may be drunk after they finish, but they're not going to pour it out. And so after the wine and the cracker is prayed over, the Catholics believe that it becomes the actual body and blood of Christ. And so you are, so it is. So to your point, Dr. Bush, you are absolutely on point with that. And I thank you for bringing that up. And to your point, Dr. Kennedy, you talked about the role of women. Well, let me tell you a little bit something about Mary that isn't talked about, but the story of Mary that is not in the canonical books. The story of Mary is that she came about in the same way that Jesus did with the virgin birth. And so, so when we see that Catholics are exalting her, and I'm talking about the Catholic Church because it's the oldest church. And so whether you like them or not, however you feel, that's the birthplace. So ultimately. And so I thank you for these ideas that you are lifting up that are solidly rooted in Scripture.
So when you talk about the Catholic Church, they provide a whole lot of examples. So even to become a saint, right, in the Catholic tradition, you have to perform miracles after you have died. After you become an ancestor, they're looking to see what power that you have. And if you perform along with you meet these other marks, some before you die, but 2 miracles after you die, then you have the right to become a saint, or what we call a divine ancestor. Okay, so now practice right in front of us all the time. Yes, sisters, go ahead.
I just wanted to just drop something in there really quick. I want us to remember that there is interface between the supernatural and the material or earthly realm. So that this is a very important point that you're lifting up, that saints become saints after they do something post-transition, after they create a miracle post-transition. A little addendum to that is, in order for these miracles to occur, from the Afrikan perspective, we must venerate, right? Every ancestral shrine is going to have some candles. It's going to have some light so the ancestors can see. It's going to have some food so that they are powerful, so that they are nourished. And it's going to have some fresh water, some omi tutu, to help them clear our roads of any debris. I want you to think now to the Mexican Day of the Dead. And I want you to see if you can't connect any of those elements to the altars that venerate ancestors for the Mexican people in particular. Okay, Dr. Bush, back to you.
No, that was good. That was good. Dr. Thomas, do you have any other questions at this time? You want me, brother?
Yeah, the other question I have, and I want now. I think it's important to understand that, religion for us is not just about what we practice, but it's also how we live. But more specifically, I would argue, is it has to do with power. You know, I've heard in the church 1,000 times, power to live right, power to walk right, power to talk right. But there's also the power to correct white supremacist institutions. There's the power to tear down kingdoms. And so I'm specifically thinking about a power to overcome the institution of enslavement. And so I'm specifically, and you know, I'm thinking about the conjurer. One conjurer in particular, Dinky, that is written about in slave religion. And so Dinky was said to have powers that came from the devil. You know, anytime we got some power, it came from something evil. But it's in good stead because Christ's power, he was said to have been healing people by the power of Beelzebub. So that's not unusual. But Dinky never worked as a slave because he was able to work spells. He had power. They were afraid of him. And so he never worked as a slave. And so can you talk a little bit about power? And what I've argued in my church, and I said this in the message, you know, if whatever power he was working from kept him from being a slave, then give me some of that power.
So, yeah, you're going to hit a touchy subject here because they spent a whole lot of time studying us and they understood that we had power. And so the way to take that power away, quite frankly, was to give us Christianity, to get you away from that power source. Ethiopia was never conquered. Why were they never conquered? Because they were steeped in their tradition. They used their spirits and their traditions to fight. Haiti is able to defeat the French. They said they shot them, but they would get back up and keep fighting. Power. And so to get you away from that power, I had to tell you that everything about you in that power was evil. I had to stop you from catching the Holy Ghost in your churches. I had to stop you from singing the real call and response songs and give you this watered down version of spirit and holy music so you can be detached completely from this power source. And so if we have been at war through religion, and Christianity has been used as a weapon of war to take you from your power source. Africans came here practicing African spirituality. They practiced this up until the 1930s and 40s. Zora Neale Hurston, she writes about this. She said the majority of people here they practiced African spirituality in the 1930s. Sturley Stucken in his book, Slave Culture, talks about how the Africans already understood the cross, that it was a symbol reflecting and representing the four corners of the earth and the four winds of heaven, and that the axle, the horizontal line, was the division between life and death. So to go below the line was to go into the realm of the ancestors. So they would take this, the old deacon of the church who still practiced African spirituality, into the ocean, and they would baptize the candidate into the water, dipping him into the land of the ancestors and have him rise again. We see this in Black Panther, right? And all the while they're singing what? Wade in the water, children, God is going to trouble the water. They didn't just make that song up. It came with them, right, Professor TJ? That came with them. They understood the power of Mommy Waters in the water, of Oshun in the water. And if you trouble the water, you can have healing. They understood in the other songs, Old Ship of Zion, that the ancestors would travel home in a ship. They understood in the singing, This Little Light of Mine, shine on me, that in the ancient mind to take on the teachings of yourself, to know thyself, that you will become illuminated and that you will shine. And so we brought this African philosophy, this African religion here in the US and continue to practice it. And they studied this in dissertations and journals and said, hey, we got to get them doing something different.
You minute, Dr. Kennedy.
I have to tell you that as you're speaking, I like to tell stories. So here's a story for you. I'm presenting a conference paper at the University of Texas at Austin for the yearly Yoruba conference. And I am befuddled because this is my first year there. And I'm seeing all these European people in traditional Afrikan clothes. The women have waist beads on. They're European. They wrap their heads in geles better than mine. They're speaking full-on fluent Yoruba. I'm telling you. I get my lapa on, my little wraparound, and have my gele on, and I head on down to the auditorium to do some African dance. I am not the best African dancer. I'm not from the continent of Africa. My mother is from Texas and my father is from Louisiana, and they chose to raise me inside of Yoruba culture. And I'm a little, clumsy or whatnot. I really don't have a good footwork. So when I go to African dance class, sometimes I be jacking stuff up. It does not look right. Those European ladies with their geles on was tearing it up, cutting it, created a storm. I almost wanted to sit there with my mouth open, but I couldn't. They were dancing around me, in front of me, as if to say, you don't know the step, get in the back of the line. And I had to put my hand up like that and stop the drummers. Everybody stopped and the room was quiet. I said, looky here, check it out. This dance that you're doing is my mama's dance. It's my mama's dance. It's in my blood, whether I do it right or not. So you're going to stand behind me and do that shit meticulously and watch me jack it up. You understand what I'm saying? I'm going to tear it up. It's going to be jacked up coming from me. And you get behind me and do that stuff like my mama said to do it. Okay? I'm only saying that because of this idea, this conversation about power and what lives inside of me. No matter what has been done to separate me from the power, I have genetically inherited my ancestors, that they live in me. That's why it's really important for us to know our grandmothers, our grandfathers, our great-great-grandmothers, so we can speak the deeds that they did of good character. If you can get up every day, this is what my practice is. Every day, change some water. I was a few minutes late trying to sign on tonight because I had to cook some food so my ancestors can eat. Every day, water. Every day, candle. Every day, food. Because if you remember the people in your lineage who are dead and gone, you will not forget your baby sitting next to you. You won't forget your husband. You're not going to forget your brother if you're caring for people that you can't even see. I just want to drop that in there when it comes to power and what we can do. I am never separated from my African power. In the easiest way for me to continue moving forward with prosperity and greatness is to remember those who came before me. That's all a celebration is. It's just a party.
And I think I thank both of you all for that. And I think we have to understand, and now I would argue that the historic Black church. So I distinguish between the Black church and the historic Black church. Just as I do the church and, the white church and the Black church. I don't talk about the white church because, I don't see the white church practicing the kinds of things that the scripture does. And I'm sorry if that offends anybody, but I just don't, because you ought to be fighting for the liberation of African people wherever we exist. That is authentic Christian practice, in my opinion. So when it comes to the historic Black church and this whole notion of power, and you mentioned something about it when you talked about, robbing us of the holy dance. I have this conversation quite often when I hear Black folks say, well, I'm going to the church over there, because in seminary, they teach you the sermon is only supposed to be 17 minutes long. That's how long service is going to be. And so you can, I've gone to white churches, and before I could sit down good, the sermon was over. I had to ask my wife, is he done? And so a lot of these habits have been adopted even with the historic Black church. And so it's difficult. And what it seems to me, and you've got to this, Dr. Kennedy, is white churches are now appropriating or trying to appropriate our spirituality. And they always get paid for it. Anything that they appropriate that comes from us, they find a way to get rich off of it. And so often they are hiring Black worship leaders who sing in a familiar style. They are trying to learn the cadence of a preacher, which has historically been, a sermon that is sung to rhythm. We saw Barack Obama do a little bit of that, which is what I think made him more attractive to Black people in terms of he had the cadence of a preacher. And so how do we as Black people come to realize that, because what you're really saying is, and I'm speaking in my mother's vernacular, if you got good religion, show some signs. And so you're talking about, you said what you do every day. Mm-hmm. You're not compartmentalizing your faith. So one of the things that I found, in just looking at African spirituality and African religion in general, is it's not something that you pick up and put down. It's also not black and white. It's also not this whole notion of good and evil in the way that we see it in the Western world. Because if spirituality was just about good and evil, then what are they? What have they been? Who teach this stuff? And so my question is, it's real simple. What now? What now as Black people? Because I heard you very loud and clearly that if I can respect those who have gone on, then I ought to be able to respect and care for those who are sitting right next to me. Mm-hmm. And that is indeed a challenge. And I think, just to push the traditional Christian narrative, the Black church narrative, is we do these things, but we dare not call them. We dare not name them. We're all standing in the kitchen preparing for Thanksgiving. That was my mother's job. And even when she got to the place where she could not cook anymore, she could give orders and tell you how to cook. And so for the first time, Thanksgiving comes and she's not there to do that. And we found ourselves saying, what would Mama say? How would she say you make a homemade pumpkin pie from a real pumpkin, not the canned stuff, right? And so how do we incorporate, and I hate to use the term incorporate, but how do we honor our religious tradition as African people?
Okay, so
go ahead. You get where I'm going, right?
Yeah, the first thing I want to say is that remember, from our cosmological stance, there is no separation, right? The supernatural beings and the human beings are interfacing with each other all of the time, whether they know it or not. The second thing, really practical things. You don't want to take the time, or you don't really feel like enough. Before I say that, from the African perspective, we don't have no smoke with Jesus, Allah, Buddha, Baphomet, whoever, Mary. We don't have no smoke with nobody. We're like, you can venerate your ancestors and be over there with Santa Barbara. You can venerate your ancestors. There's no conflict on our side. Now, Catholic people, maybe Buddhist people, maybe Christian people, Islamic people, they have a conflict like, oh no, I can't do this and that. But from the African perspective, we are both and. You can do it. You can be Islamic and also venerate your ancestors. That being said, simple, easy way to remember your people. Some people are going to bring their hands together before they eat, and they're going to say their prayer and bless the food. African people are going to do that, and they're going to take a little bit of everything on their plate and push it to the side and say, this is for my ancestors, and they're not going to eat it. A very simple daily offering that you can do anytime you put food to your mouth. You can say, as it is on earth, it is in heaven, and push a little bit of food to the side. Another really important practical thing we could do, I don't know how everybody's going to get to do it, but I'm going to say it, and maybe some of you will start. Every Friday, I wear white. Every Friday. And I don't watch any TV. I wear white to celebrate, to venerate, to honor my ancestors. I don't have to tell anybody. I could be on my way to church. I could have a top hat on that's white, a baseball cap on. I don't care. You don't even have to tell nobody. But eventually people are going to see you wearing white on Friday, and they be like, why you wear white on Friday? And you could be like, oh, just to remember and celebrate my ancestors. Who's going to tell you not to do that? And it's about fueling the battery. If we are all doing an effort, something that will help us be liberated through supernatural. Dr. Bush talked about Haiti. I didn't bring it up. He brought it up. All over the world, you can see people liberate themselves through prayer. And honoring your ancestors is one of the primary forms of prayer that African people use.
Yes, that's good. And definitely, as Sister Doctor talks about, African spirituality is fluid. And so when you see people move throughout the continent of Africa, they can take on the other deities of that particular region. That said, if you're talking about being free, however, right? When the white man came to the Americas, when the white man came into Africa, they brought no God with them. They had no God to give you. So why are we taking this God and their religion from those who absolutely mean to destroy and kill us? They will never give you a tool of power to use against them. So they will let you go ahead and practice these religions, and particularly in this country, Christianity, because they know what they gave you, at least the form of Christianity they gave you, has no power. If you ever played video games, if your video control was not hooked up to that console, like we used to give our little brothers and act like they could play, you had no power, you had no control. That little kid would be sitting there just trying to play that game. But that's like Christianity. They gave you that remote control. You sitting there trying to make the best out of it. Because we are African people, we pulled out of ourselves, right, and made the best out of Christianity. But Christianity in and of itself, in terms of what they gave you, had no power and no more than that remote control had connection to that TV and that console. So we're talking about being free, that we have to get rid of other folks' gods and other folks' religion and practice our own. That's how we have power and freedom.
Dr. Thomas, not to cut
Yes.
you off, but if we can kind of move to the question in the chat with the time that we have left, if you check.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at. So there's a couple of questions. So I'm gonna try to go to the top. Can you help me, Brother Amiri, to make sure that I'm getting the first question? Because there was some of them I think have been answered.
Okay. What I was just doing was just copying and pasting the questions as they came in.
Okay.
Yeah. So
because there are a lot of people that are blowing my phone up, they can't get on. So I guess we're maxed out at 100.
Yeah, we're maxed out.
Yeah, so they can't get on. I guess they were late. So what I would say is, and now it's just moved. there was a question that said, okay, Dr. Libby said, just adding an interesting link to the discussion, the story of Simeon Tokyo, the third prophecy of Fatima. Interesting reading. Now, I'm not familiar with the third prophecy of Fatima, but I am familiar with the Fatima that the Catholics refer to, which is the miracle of the dancing sun that happened during the 1918 pandemic, where they argue that the worship, God was offended by the worship of the church. And so that was so can you speak about that? Libby, if you can. Okay. Oh, here's a good question. You discussed that all religions are African religions. Do you believe that Judaism is considered an African religion, since Christianity and Islam technically was started from, is that Tekan?
The Tanakh, so like the Hebrew Bible, like Torah, etc.
Yeah. I'm from, okay. Can I answer that? Yes, they are.
Exactly. Thank you. Let me be the deer in that bush. Yes. Everybody that agrees, raise your hand.
Especially that. You know, the Hebrew people are, in fact, just plainly put, African people. Right?
What I say often, this is how I settle that argument. Find some people in that Bible that's not African.
We'll wait.
Are you gonna be waiting for a long time? you might as well just post up.
Okay, he's like,
it is so replete.
You're gonna be waiting.
Yeah. And this is the thing, Dr. Bush and Dr. Kennedy. And this is for my more fundamentalist conservative.
Can I just interrupt you really quick? Jaden Eden says, so how they get names like Peter, John, Luke, though? Well, ask King James when he revised everything. Ask historians when they revised things. Ask Napoleon when he was shooting noses off. Ask Hermes Trismegistus when they came and raided the Egyptian temples and libraries. That's how the names got changed.
Well,
because revisionist history.
Well, in the same way. For those who are in my class, I don't know if you're in my class. No, you can't be in my class. Because what we know is in Africa, one drop of Caucasian blood made you white. So the way that many of these names were changed is that they made them white, in the same way that there was no Pythagoras, the Pythagorean theorem. That theorem that's solely African. And so it's difficult to accept or believe the fact that they would go through here and change the names. But what they weren't able to do as well was to change the concepts. And so when you hear things like 12 gates to the city, this is when you hear the Garden of Eden, this is language that comes from Africa. When it talks about, living out your religion, your faith, these are like, and as I've said before, the Shema is both, held by Jewish folks and Christians alike. And the basis of the faith of both of those traditions is the Shema. So absolutely African. Absolutely, they're all African. Absolutely.
And you'll see them on their knees at the feet of the Black Madonna all over Europe. Don't believe me. Google me. Don't believe me? Just watch, Google it, and see how the African woman is revered, because she is the beginning of it. She is the beginning of celebration. She is the beginning of life. She is the beginning of humanity. And I am not the only one saying it. I'm saying it after, and everybody loves to hear what the Europeans say. The Europeans say that I am the Queen Mother. So everybody, please accept it. They've spoken. What do you say?
Look, you can say you can believe it because they said it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, with all due respect to Black women, but in addition, I mean, everywhere the Black man went on the planet, he was considered, literally called God. That was here in the New World and in the Americas. That's in Asia. That's in India. That's all through Africa. They constructed and built images of God in the image of Black men, period. And you can drive there and see it. You don't have to read it in the book. Those images of Buddha are there. Black men.
When I look at the images of Buddha with those little curly, I don't know what people think those little curly, nice parted balls are, naps, Bantu knots. I don't know what they think. It's not corn silk. It's not blowing in the wind. It looks like little beady bees on somebody's head with the pudgy nose and the round tummy. I came with y'all. Somebody has asked the question, are there African gods and goddesses? Yes, all over the continent, in all countries, we are going to have African counterparts to energies which enter the world everywhere. For example, Aphrodite for the Greeks, goddess of love and beauty. For Indian people, you will see that energy named Saraswati. For the Yoruba people, you will see that energy named Oshun. So there are myths all over Africa. All of the ethnicities have creation myths. The most important thing I want us to remember is that here in Christianity, there is really no celebrated woman. But all over Africa, you are going to find divinities that are women, that speak and have power.
And it's important. It's one of the things that I wanted to mention just in terms of this. You know, there's certain, and I said this to my class earlier today, there's certain things that you will notice. Like we have all heard, if you've been to church any period of time, you've heard this quote: God will provide a way of escape. There's no temptation but that which is common to man, but God will provide a way of escape. African war was centered in finding ways for the enemy to escape. As long as they retreated, they were good, unless they made them work. And you could, as a captured village in Africa, you could become the chief of that village. So their understanding of what it meant to conquer in war was much different. They only killed when they had to. And so that language of way of escape in scripture is specifically related to African wars where they would provide ways of escape for their enemies.
Just going back one bit, Homer writes in really the first book from Europeans, he talks about that the Greek gods, and most people are familiar with Greek gods, would once a year travel to Africa to learn how to be God.
To learn how to be a god.
He writes this. I'm not saying it. You go get it. That the Greek god
come on.
would travel into Africa, spend time amongst the Ethiopians. Ethiopia was a general name for Africa by the Greeks at that time, to learn and to study how to be divinities and gods. You can check this yourself.
Please stop it, Dr. Lawson Bush, talking to me about the gods went to God College on the continent with my mom and daddy. Please stop it.
But everybody else did too. So all of their philosophers went
everybody,
to study.
Everybody, not just the Greeks, everybody.
Not only did the people, but the gods went there as well.
Oh my goodness, everybody.
To study how to be gods.
You just got the humans in Timbuktu and the gods.
And if you couldn't make it, they would fake it and put it on their resume.
Not the Instagram of the old day, the resume.
and we won't even begin to talk about their, the reality of some of their of their medical professionals in the Western world who was in graduate school, who wrote one page no longer than 10-page dissertations and became the father of certain areas of medicine as a result. You know, and we won't neglect to talk about the fact that the first vaccine, the protocol for vaccines was created by an enslaved African, and he single-handedly was responsible for ending smallpox. And so all of this, you know, and the reason that this is important is that, you know, I think in many ways, religion is probably the last we haven't gotten liberation in any other areas either, but at least we're thinking about it. And so this conversation is important because it gives an opportunity for us to have some dialogue about what it is we believe, you know, unfettered, you know. And so I appreciate the positions that you all have, you know, that you all have been taking, that you know, and just sharing with us your understanding of African spirituality. And so it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. I don't know how many more questions we have left. Oh, yeah, somebody mentioned Imhotep. You know, I mean, Imhotep was an expert in everything. You know, when they say, you know, jack of all trades, what is it? Jack of all trades, master of none, that's a lie. African people have proved that to be wrong.
And not only that, he, after he died, was venerated and seen as the first Christ.
Right. They made
Spiritual, highly spiritual.
And the message from Burner, I believe, would be that every Black person should please remember that you were Africans before you became anything else.